Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. This afternoon, the subject of our lesson is motivation and affect. I think really there probably isn't a topic in education that's more important for you than motivation, because we all know that we have a lot of students, certainly by the time they're in the 4th or 5th grade, who we talk about by saying, well, they can, but they won't. So really, one of my questions to you today is, why is it, do you think, that that description or that expression so typically expresses really the affect of some of the students we have in school? Why is it that we say about these kids, they can, but they won't? What does this mean? If someone can do something, if it's an easy task for them to perform, but they won't do it anyway, we have to question what's going on there. And part of the problem, I believe you're right about, maybe not all of it, but at least part of the problem relates to the fact that sometimes they are not motivated to do so. They do not believe that performing this activity you want them to perform is going to have a worthwhile payoff for them at the end. I want to tell you a story along this line about one of my children who was in high school. And of course, I had 2 boys, and they were in high school at the same time, and all I did was laundry. I did laundry. I washed it, I folded, I sprayed it, I washed it, I hung it. I picked it up out of the floor, but all I did was laundry. So I decided one day that I was going to teach my 16-year-old to do his own laundry. That seems like a reasonable request for a 16-year-old, doesn't it? I mean, wouldn't you think that most 16-year-olds who can read and write could probably operate a Kenmore washer? So I said, okay, Pike, today is the day I'm going to teach you to do the laundry. You're going to be responsible now for doing your own laundry. He said, what? I said, I'm going to show you how to wash your clothes. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, get your dirty clothes and follow me. This is real easy. You're not going to mind it. And this way, you'll be totally independent. You can have whatever you want to wear clean whenever you want to wear it. He said, I have plenty of clothes now, Mom. I said, well, that's beside the point. You're going to learn, you are going to learn to operate this washing machine anyway. So he schlepped along behind me into the utility room, and I'm trying to be very enthusiastic and upbeat and sell him on the many merits of being able to wash his own clothes. And I said, well, the first thing you do is you sort the lights from the darks. He said, what do you mean light and dark? I said, well, the ones that are light colored. Well, I said, well, let me show you. Let's take these whites, for example, right here. And the first thing you do is that you have to look for dirty spots. And by this time, he's rolling his eyes. So I said, you spray them like this and put them in the laundry like this. And I said, he said, how can you expect me to do this? I have no idea how to do this. What are you talking about? Why are you doing this to me? This is stupid. I said, so you can learn to do the laundry and I don't have to stop. Oh, well, of course, it took 30 minutes to get one load of laundry started. I thought by this time I could have washed them, dried them, folded them up, hung them, and put them back in his closet. But anyway, after a few sessions of trying to teach him how to run the washing machine himself, I concluded that this was just a task he simply couldn't learn to do. So, as most mothers do who get beat down by the system, I went on back to doing the laundry for him myself rather than fight about it. It was easier to do it myself than to argue about the laundry. And about a week later, I heard a huge commotion going on in my backyard. And I looked out, and my entire backyard looked like a junkyard. There were more used cars. I thought they had started one of those car theft rings where they steal them and send them to Mexico. I went flying out the back door. I said, "What's going on here?" Some kid I never saw before in my life said, "Oh, well, we've all brought our cars over here for Pike to work on." There were dashboards, side panels, body parts to cars spread all over my entire backyard. And I said, "Why is all this stuff here?" And the kid said, "Well, he's the only kid in our school that knows how to install stereo equipment, so we've all been to Car Toys and bought new stereos, and we brought the cars over here so he can put them in for us." And I said, "Oh, this same boy who can't quite master a Kenmore washer is somehow able to dismantle an automobile, remove a stereo system that was worked fine to start with, put a brand new one in, and reassemble the car without any problem." I thought, what is wrong? What's wrong with my program? And I couldn't even teach him to use a Kenmore washer. There's just a cognitive disconnect here for me. But of course, the answer to that lies in the fact that he was extremely motivated to work on his car and willing to work on the cars of others, probably for a multitude of reasons. One, he learned that he could do it. He had a sense of efficacy about his ability to work on these cars. Second, it was reinforcing because he got the desired result, which for some reason is this sound equipment that you couldn't run after me. It's an embarrassment for me to ride in the same car with them, but chugging down the road listening to all that stuff. But it had a big payoff for them. And of course, I'm sure he had some measure of social esteem that accrued to him because he was a child in school who had figured out how to do this and was able to help everybody else. But all of that went together into a package that made him decide at that point in time installing stereo equipment in cars is a worthwhile activity for me to engage in. And really and truly, running a Kenmore washer and dryer just doesn't have the same payoff for me, and I'm not going to do it. I'm going to refuse to do it whether I really am capable of learning to do that or not. I'm not going to do it. So you say to me, what on earth does that have to do with my kids in the 4th grade? And what I'm telling you today is that has everything in the world to do with your kids in the 4th grade. Because if you teach children who are in the intermediate to upper grades in school, what you're going to find is that for a whole variety of reasons, many of which we'll be talking about today, these youngsters can conceivably meet the expectations that you detail for them in a learning environment. But for whatever reasons, they've made an arbitrary decision on the front end that they're not going to do it. And until and unless you change their motivational set and their decisioning process that they've gone through, you're going to continue to have these children sit in your room day after day who deep down inside you feel could probably do everything that you need for them to do. But they won't do it. They won't take a chance on doing it. So the question becomes, why will these children not do that thing that it is you want them to do? So the subject of Chapter 9 is enhancing motivation and affect. What can we do as teachers to increase the probability that the students in our classroom are going to do what we need them to do when we need them to do it? When we talk about motivation, we're really talking about In this case, the desire students have to succeed in school. What it is about the task or activity or payoff or their own internal constructs that make them want to perform these expectations that we have for them to perform. Affect, on the other hand, refers to the student's emotional mood, his personal feelings, or sort of the demeanor he exhibits around these activities. When we talk about motivation, we talk about two primary forms of motivation. One is intrinsic motivation. And when we talk about intrinsic motivation, we are really talking about the extent to which a student is likely to perform an academic task just because he's curious to know what the outcome is, or he wants to succeed and have the benefits that accrue to a person in the system. You know, we really have make achieving, high achieving, a very rewarding experience for kids in school. So sometimes they just learn the innate desire to succeed, and they're willing to perform in order to succeed. Or they want to make a contribution, they want to be a part of a group, and they want to fit in. And the way they do that is by achieving in school. But for some reason that is either inherent in the child or inherent in the system, the child behaves as we want to because internally he thinks it's important and there's a payoff for him in doing so. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, refers to participation in an activity based on the fact that there's an expected external reward or consequential event that is going to accrue to a child. Now, sometimes intrinsic and extrinsic motivation become very difficult to distinguish one from another. For example, how many of you in here think it's important for you to earn an A? Well, how would you feel if I told you it wasn't? That probably nobody will ever know you made an A in here except me and your mother. If she still pays your tuition, if she doesn't pay your tuition, she may not even know. What if I told you that it probably would make absolutely no difference in your future ability to get a job if you made a C? Lee?
I don't think it would matter to me because I want to do it for me.
You want to do it for you. But what I'm telling you is it doesn't make any difference to you.
But you can't tell me that.
I can't tell you that because lifelong participation in a system has told you, if I get this external reward out here, this A, my teacher's going to like me, my mother's going to like me, I'm going to be smart, I'm going to be recognized, I'm going to get the bumper sticker that says straight A student. All of these things are going to accrue to me. You have participated in a system for so long that you have internalized this as a personal objective. So many of you are willing to do things, complain, whine, snort, carry on. Oh, the things they make me do. I have to do this. I have this the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't know what. Blah, blah, blah. You don't have to really do any of those things. But you're willing to do them because along the line somewhere, somebody has convinced you, or you have convinced yourself that you're able to do this and good things will accrue to you if you do it. So even though the A is really an extrinsic motivator, it's really a social thing, social event that follows, or a bumper sticker that says I'm a straight A student, or whatever the things are that you get. Some of these are very extrinsic in nature. but you have learned that they're very important. We associate things with them and internalize those things. So an A no longer means an A to you. An A represents that you're a good person and you're approved by the teacher and you're all of these kinds of things. So as a student, many of you who think it's very important to earn A's do so not based on the rational fact that anything different is going to happen in your life if you get an A than if you get a C, because nothing different is going to happen. You'll be just as certified to teach if you make a C as if you make an A. Nevertheless, it's important for you to make an A anyway. The truth is, kids who are underachievers didn't buy into that. They didn't wake up in one day and say, this making an A is a good thing. If I make an A, the teacher likes me, my mama likes me, good things happen to me, I can do this, I'm going to make A's. That scenario didn't unfold for them in school in the same way that it did for you. That leads us to conclude all kinds of things about kids that are probably wrong. Because most people who are going to be teachers did very well in school. Making good grades was important to them. Making good grades, doing well, being recognized for that was an intrinsically reinforcing thing for them. So they say, this is intrinsically reinforcing. What's wrong with you? You don't want to do this. Well, there's a lot of variance in what kids think are important and also in what kids believe they are willing to do. And oftentimes the youngsters who are low achievers, particularly after they are in about the second or third grade, learn that efforting doesn't have a big payoff for them. My son learned that if he efforted, he was very motivated to learn to put stereo equipment in cars. So he got the book and he read it and he figured and he figured and he figured. And he figured out how to do it because he was very motivated to do it. And of course, his efforting had a positive payoff. After he efforted, he was successful. But if you plan to teach third or fourth grade, you will have many youngsters who efforted their full quota in kindergarten. They efforted and efforted and efforted in kindergarten and first grade, and they said, there's no payoff in this for me. I'm not efforting anymore. Efforting sucks. Why effort? It's a lot easier to just slap along and get by. Forget this efforting. There's another little issue about efforting. What happens to the child who efforts and is unsuccessful? What happens then? Huh?
You quit.
There's not very much of a payoff, is there? Not only that, what do you tell yourself when you try really hard and you're unsuccessful? What kind of a message does that send you about yourself? This is an important part, and I want you to think about it. Because the most damning thing to your self-esteem is efforting, which then results in failure. Because if you try the very best that you can and you're still unsuccessful, you have to attribute that lack of success to some internal variable. Like maybe I'm not smart enough, maybe I'm not as capable as somebody else. Maybe I'm not as good as somebody else. But efforting with failure comes as a terrible expense to a student's self-esteem. Many of you, if you're honest about it, will admit that when we had our first test in here, you said to your best friend, you all have all teamed up over here, you to the other one, oh, well, I didn't have time to study for this. I didn't have time. I know I'm going to blow this test. I didn't have time. Well, I went out last night. I had something. I went out. I didn't have time to study. Then you left that test and you thought, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought. I studied real hard and I studied the right things. It wasn't as bad as I thought. But do you say that to your friend? Oh, no. You say, oh, I blew that. I know I failed that test. Why do you do that? You do it to create a safety zone for yourself. So if you really did fail the test, it won't be because you were stupid. You say, oh, well, if I'd have tried, I could have passed the test. Don't you say that? I see you sitting there grinning. I know students say this because I've said it myself, of course. Nobody wants to take a chance on being found out. Who is it? Somebody important, I don't remember who it is, says it's better to be presumed a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. So that's kind of a thing that goes along with motivation. Kids will not even admit to efforting for fear that failure and efforting will cast some question upon their worth as an individual. So you have to take this into consideration. Those of you in here who were waving your arm and flapping up and down and arguing with me about the importance of an A are willing to effort for an A because experience has taught you that the payoff will not be loss of self-esteem, but the payoff will be validation of self-esteem. You'll get that A and say, oh, well, bam, am I smart or what? That's what we say to ourselves. So all of this process goes into the decision of whether a child decides he or she is going to effort or try to meet your expectations or not. There's another factor. Sometimes we're just not willing to do what it takes. You know, what it takes for you to make an A in here might be different than what it takes for somebody less capable to make an A in here. I remember when I first went away to college, I went with another girl, several other girls my age, but one of them had a struggle in school. I think she had a hard time in school. And we went to college that first summer. We took English and biology. It's 1,000 wonders I passed anything. We were so bad. I won't go into all the details on that, but we were so bad. And I went with my friend Ellen, and she was real smart and didn't do anything, just showed up and took the test. And besides that, I think I took biology and English, and she took art and PE or something, She was just trying to get enough hours to get married, which she ultimately did. But anyway, I was trying to party with her over here and compete with the other one over here that wasn't quite as bright as Ellen in subjects that were 3 times harder. Anyway, at the end of the summer, somehow we all eked out a C in everything we'd taken, and believe me, that was good enough for me. I didn't have that. I didn't have to make an A in everything at that point in my life. So I was happy with my C in biology and English because it allowed me to go on to college and join a sorority, which was really my motivating factor. But anyhow, I realized at the end of that summer, if I had have had to work as hard to pass as this other girl, I would have never done it. I'd have had to have been a waitress or something else in my lifetime because I wouldn't have efforted that hard. a task doesn't require the same thing for everybody. So you may be asking a child to work multiplication tables, which are relatively easy for most third graders, but extremely complex and difficult and challenging for other third graders, and also much more time consuming and much more difficult. So there's a ratio there of how, even if we feel that we can do something and we want to do something, how much effort does it take? The other thing is not only how much effort does it take, but how distasteful is that effort for us? How much do we dislike the task at hand? Probably doing the laundry wasn't particularly difficult for Pike, but it was just such a distasteful job. He just didn't want to do it and didn't see any need for it. So how many of you in here like math? Working math equations for you probably wouldn't be the same as working math equations for somebody who really doesn't like math at all. That's what being music would be like for me. If I had to take piano lessons, I'd just have to shoot myself right now and get out of my misery. I'm not good at it. I hate it. I can't do it. And so I have a sense of learned helplessness about that activity, that I won't be able to do it. But all of these things come into motivation. And motivation is a very complicated thing. We say, oh, well, motivation, it's the desire to succeed at school. Now, isn't that a nice, clean, tie that up definition? But that desire to succeed in school, or that motivation, is based on your perceptions of the task. How unpleasant it is, how difficult it is for you to do. How do you feel about doing that task in the first place? Second of all, is based on your sense of self-efficacy about that task. Do you really think if you effort that you will be successful? There are some things I could tell you that you would be able to do. Like if I told you, for example, how many of you would like to go on a spaceship? Nobody? I knew that. What if I told you you could just get in your car at the end of the day and go to NASA and sign up for the next manned space flight? You probably wouldn't deviate from your usual path home, would you? Why? You probably really don't believe if you went to NASA they'd let you go on the next trip to the moon, do you? Your experience and your common sense and your reasoning have told you that while that's something you'd like to do, it may not be a realistic objective for you at this point in time. Well, kids are the same way. They develop a sense of self-efficacy about school. The thing that has taught you, if you effort a whole bunch, you're going to be successful, has taught other youngsters, if I effort a whole bunch, it's not going to do me any good. And so when you say to them, oh, well, let's just sit down and try this today, you're going to be great at it, they think, yeah, sure, right, but I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to take a chance on that today. Another thing is the strength of the consequential events. What happens to the kid if they're successful? Do they feel good about themselves? Have they learned that A's are important? Maybe not by now. Maybe the children who are underachievers, those who are not motivated, those who can but they won't, are the youngsters who have said, hey, you know, I'm really making it just fine with no A's, with no smiley faces on my paper, with no gold stars. I don't need all that stuff that these other kids think is so important. I've learned to do without it quite well, thank you very much. So just take those gold stars and shove them, if you will. Sometimes for these youngsters, we have to structure other consequential events. We have to create artificial or extrinsic consequential events that may be motivating enough so that they will effort enough, because we have to break that pattern of failure. Nothing succeeds like success in terms of motivating students at school. So until we have all of these things in place, the child is not going to be willing to take a chance on doing a task. Some of the preconditions that you can do to ensure, at least increase the probability that a student is motivated to achieve in school, is first of all to create a well-structured, well-organized classroom environment. It is very important for students to feel that they are welcome and necessary members of your group, that they're accepted, that they have a positive contribution to make. Many times children have a sense. We've talked before, and we did last week, about cooperative learning. There's a great deal of overlap between cooperative learning and motivation, because cooperative learning is one of the things that we use to motivate kids to participate who may not be enthusiastic participators. But in any event, we talked last time about the fact that some members in the group may not be inclined to participate and may let the other group members do all of the work. Well, one reason might be because they're lazy or whatever, but one reason might be because they think they can't do it as well as someone else. So it is important for us to build a sense of community and emphasize the importance of each contributor. And if you're having difficulty with that, or particularly if you have a child who's misbehaving, I've mentioned this before, try to find an opportunity to say 2 or 3 positive things about that student every day, and see if you can increase his sense of positive feelings about membership in the class and the group. Another thing is to elicit positive peer support. There are a number of activities you can do for this. One of them is talked about in your book, the hot seat activity, where kids take turns getting in the hot seat. And you don't have to do them all at one time, but let kids take turns about being in the hot seat and having their peers think of all the nice things they can say about them. We have suggestion boxes and all kinds of things we can do that follow up on this basic idea of communicating to each child in the classroom how important he is and what his good qualities are. We need to practice using statements that promote acceptance all of the time, and certainly from the time children are in early childhood education right on up through higher grades. An important thing for you to think about is making sure that the materials you present to the child who's not achieving are at an appropriate difficulty level. A child is not likely to be able to engage in an activity if he doesn't have the requisite skills. Even if he is theoretically capable of doing that activity, you need to make certain that the student has the requisite skills to do so, because if they are provided with information that is too easy, of course they're likely to lose interest in it and become bored. But on the other hand, if the material is consistently too difficult, they will lose their persistence or their task commitment, and they will fail to effort toward this until they master the objective. I don't know if you remember from Dr. Lieberman's class or not, discussions about Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development, but Vygotsky is a theorist that's a little bit different than Piaget, in that Piaget believes when you reach the developmental level, learning will occur. But Vygotsky, on the other hand, believes that if you learn, then it propels you to the next level of development. And he observed in his research that youngsters are able to perform tasks with assistance, with peer and authority assistance, that they are not able to, at a higher level, that they are not able to master on their own, but that when they have practice, guided practice or practice with assistance, you see, then that learning how to do it with assistance will propel them to the next level of development. So all, according to Vygotsky, and I think certainly which is a reasonable assumption for us in here, the level at which we orient instruction for children is at their challenge level, the level where they can do it, but it's effortful and may require some assistance. And then when they master the instruction at that level, then with rehearsal they become independent learners and able to move to the next developmental level. So be sure you remember when you have a child who's not achieving to assess his present level of functioning and determine what kinds of tasks you can assign to him that are actually at a challenge level. One of the ways you can do this is by questioning students and monitoring their practice closely so that you can tell whether or not the material is at an appropriate level. Another precondition for to enhance motivation is to make sure that tasks are meaningful and worthwhile. We know, of course, that is a classic example when you go back to Pike and the washing machine. He didn't see any reason he needed to be able to learn to operate a washing machine. He thought it was much more meaningful to install stereo equipment. But that is a classic example. I cannot imagine how far that child's high school teachers could have gotten if they used math and science and chemistry and even literature as the background for teaching him how to work on cars. He'd probably be the best mechanic in the entire world by now, and also probably have a very sound liberal arts education, because he was so motivated to learn about two things: cars and sports. And if the content of the instruction had anything to do with those subjects, it suddenly became very important and very relevant to him. This notion about making learning more meaningful and relevant to students really forms the basis of constructivist education. The notion that we construct students' learning experiences out of the kinds of things that are important to them. This very same child that I talked about earlier was a child I'm not sure who would have ever become an independent reader if one of his aunts hadn't have given him a subscription to Sports Illustrated for Kids. He got, when he was about in the 4th or 5th grade, he got this subscription to Sports Illustrated for Kids, and he was so excited you would have thought it would have cost $2,000 an issue. It's amazing the thing that motivates children. You know, it's so hard to predict, but he was so excited about this magazine. So I'd let him read every night before he went to bed, and his bedroom was up on the 3rd floor, so if he got to a word he didn't know, he had to come all the way down the stairs to ask somebody what that word was. So finally, it was such a puzzle to him, he began to figure out these words for himself. He was really right there at that zone of proximal development where he was just about able to be an independent reader, but not quite there yet. But because the material, the reading material was so relevant, he was willing to commit to that task till he could make meaning out of that. So this says for you as a 2nd or 3rd grade teacher, if you want your kids to learn map reading skills, you'll be much better off to let them try to use a map to determine the directions of how to get to Disney World as opposed to Disneyland and see which one is the farthest, rather than probably have them go to Washington, D.C. and see the Lincoln Memorial. They're likely to be much more motivated to use map skills if they think that someday it can get them to Disneyland. We have a real shortfall in this area related to a lot of our arts and science activities. Can you imagine how much more meaningful Romeo and Juliet would be to teenagers if it could be interpreted as a modern day love story? Because they all think they're in love anyway. Right?
They did remake it.
Huh?
They did remake it with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, I know it. Wasn't it wonderful? I wish Miss Turk could have seen it. I might have had a greater appreciation for Shakespeare today. As it was, I thought, why are they making me do this? And the truth is, Shakespeare's the greatest psychologist probably in the entire world. You know, he identified most problems in family dynamics hundreds of years ago, whenever it was he was rolling around over there. I mean, the 17th century, about? I don't know. Hope nobody in literature is watching this. But in any event, keep in mind constructivist education, because if you're teaching children map reading skills, it doesn't matter where they're planning to go. If you're teaching them budgeting skills, it doesn't matter where they need to go. Closely associated to constructivism is the notion of integrating basic skills into a cohesive group. You could plan a trip to Disneyland that involved budgeting, reading, social studies. I'm sure you could get science in there some way. But there are all kinds of things you could do in an integrated unit on Disneyland that would be meaningful for teaching, meaningful and motivating for teaching students basic skills. When they told Pike he had to read in school, well, he said, oh, okay, how much is the least amount I can do to get by? And therefore, he was not an independent reader by the time he was in the 4th grade. You know, he made okay grades in reading. I don't remember what they were, but enough to get by, certainly. But I thought, my goodness, is this kid ever going to learn to read out of the textbook? And sure enough, it was Sports Illustrated for Kids that did it. But bear in mind those things when you have students in your classroom who are unmotivated, because you will have many. And they will be the students who are not on task. And when they're not on task, several other things can be happening, and most of them are bad. They're disrupting the others, taking them off task. They're sharpening their pencil and walking around and making you crazy. The best they can do is go to sleep. We have students in middle schools all over the place who have made a tacit arrangement with their teacher. If you don't bother me, I won't bother you. They have trained themselves to sleep all day and stay up all night. So they go to school in the morning, go to their first period class. It's bedtime for them. They put their heads on their desk and sleep till the bell rings. Then they get up, go to the next class, put their heads on their desk and sleep till the bell rings. They've made this arrangement with the school. You don't bother me, I won't bother you. But and of course they maintain that arrangement till they're 16, and then they quit going to school. And that's going to be the prevailing pattern with someone, with some of these youngsters, if someone doesn't break that pattern and motivate them to once more take a chance on attempting, efforting in school, and do so in a way that will result in their being successful. Some other methods for making learning more meaningful that are related to some of the things we've said before are, like I said, with constructivism, selecting topics that reflect student interest, rotate the content being studied to local issues or problems that are familiar and important to students. There are lots of things in the news right now. I'll give you an example of this. One time I went to observe an intern. I nearly died in the 3rd grade. Oh, this is the worst lesson. This man was teaching at a ghetto school, and he was teaching how to write a paragraph, and the subject that he was using was the Three Little Pigs. Well, kids have outgrown the Three Little Pigs in kindergarten, or at first grade at the latest. If you still have Three Little Pigs and you're not teaching kindergarten, get rid of it. And I mean, these kids were climbing all over the walls. I mean, they were hanging from the ceilings. I could just barely sit in there and watch this lesson. I was about to have heart palpitations. And I looked over there. This was when Akeem Olajuwon was King Kong, you know. And I looked over there and I saw a newspaper with Olajuwon had broken some record. And I mean, there was about a life-size picture of Olajuwon over there in the sports section of the news that the teacher had turned the page open to. And I said, wait a minute. And I got up in front of these kids and I said, who do you think this is? I said, I bet nobody in here knows who this is. Well, of course, they thought, who is that stupid white woman? But they were all looking at me. They said, of course we know who that is, you dummy. That's Akeem Olajuwon. I said, you know anything about him? I said, who is he anyway? I said, he's the basketball player for the Houston Rockets. This woman's a nutcase, you know. I didn't care if they thought I was stupid, as long as they were listening. So I made them generate all the things they knew about Olajuwon. And then I said, what if we were going to write a paragraph about Olajuwon, what would be our topic sentence? So they debated that. We thought of several alternatives, and I had told everybody to pick a topic sentence and then write a paragraph about some of Olajuwon's attributes. I think I read them this article before it was over. But of course, they had a whole different take on writing an article, writing a paragraph, because they were interested in Olajuwon. They thought he was King Kong, you know. He ruled in basketball, and these kids thought basketball was the most interesting thing in the world, and so they were fascinated by this. And I think you can use those things to motivate and entice your kids. It's very irrelevant whether children are writing a paragraph about Three Little Pigs or something else, as long as they're writing a paragraph and it has an appropriate topic sentence and it develops that topic with 3 or 4 points and has closure and is capitalized and punctuated in the right way. Would you agree? If somebody can write a paragraph about Olajuwon, they can probably write a paragraph about the drought in California, if they're inclined to. So whenever you can, use the content around you, use local issues, use sports heroes or whomever you need to motivate the students to learn the basic skills that they need to learn to be successful. Allow students to select their assignment from a list of options. Everybody may not be into Olajuwon, particularly when youngsters are in the primary grades. The interests that little girls and little boys have are very different. So they may have a range of topics or subjects or whatever that they can choose from. Be sure and begin and include your classes with an explanation to your children about why this is important. About, first of all, what we're going to do, a statement of the objective, and second of all, why it's important, why they will need to know this. And there are all kinds of reasons that people need to write paragraphs for the rest of their lives, to interview for jobs, to do all kinds of things that are very relevant to their everyday lives. One of the things your book talks about, and it's much easier said than done, I will certainly have to admit, but that is creating classrooms that are task-oriented rather than ego-oriented. We'll revisit this issue again when we get to Chapter 12, which has to do with assessment. But certainly most of our schools are driven today by a grading system that says really the most important and the best students are the ones who get an A. And that A's are only meaningful. A's are based on who does absolutely the best work. The only consideration for earning an A is how your work compares to others in your classroom. Would you agree? That's really how we grade kids. So, the question comes, how do we change this? Because a system that says only a few people are eligible for the reinforcers is one that says by definition the rest of you aren't going to be very successful. No matter how hard you try, if you don't get an A, if you're not the best, you're not successful. And what we observe, of course, is repeatedly that the students who make A's make all of the A's, and the students who don't make A's don't make any A's, or they don't make very many very often. Do you know what the best single predictor is of future grades? Past grades. So if you made all A's last year, you're probably going to make all A's this year. And if you make all A's this year, you're probably going to make all A's next year. That's why it's such a red flag to us. And you see it written all the time when you're worried about kids who are substance abusers or whether they're suicidal or have these characteristics. Has there been a big change in their grades? It's such a red flag to us. So we really know that a child who's an achiever has a pattern of achievement. And that's great for the kids who have a pattern of achievement. But what does that say about the kids who don't achieve? Because, you know, probably they're not going to be very successful. And it is hard to be motivated to do something when you know you're not going to do a very good job of it in the end. Task-oriented classrooms, on the other hand, children in task-oriented classrooms are successful because their success is not defined by being the best in the class, but it's defined by a series of factors which are under their control. For example, what is their attitude? What is their effort? What is their progress? How many objectives have they mastered? Not who mastered the top objectives or the best objectives or did the objectives best. There are lots of things we can do to emphasize effort and progress rather than the absolute standard of being the best and brightest. And certainly children who are low achievers, many of those go in the category of being children with special needs, can benefit greatly from these types of classrooms that are task-oriented rather than ego-oriented, because suddenly they have a chance to be successful, to make progress, to be recognized, to be awarded. Can you just imagine how a classroom might change if you awarded grades based on the person who had made the most progress rather than the person who did the best? Or the child who tried the hardest. Oftentimes the child who does the best doesn't try the hardest at all. If they had rewarded us in college for trying the hardest, that first summer we were in college, I would have made an F and so would Ellen. That other poor girl would have made an A. She studied all day every day and all night every night, while Ellen and I were at the student union, like sneaking beer in the dorm or something. We certainly weren't studying biology and English, I can tell you that. So the student who works the hardest and tries the hardest, we don't offer reward with anything. And some of those things we can't control as teachers because we're required by the district to grade in certain ways, but some of those things we can. We can have individual competitions and reward group achievements and things, in addition to the fact that we have to assign grades. So we do have some control over these things. I talked a little bit earlier to you about self-esteem, but I do think that probably self-esteem issues are the very most important thing that we have to deal with children in school. I used to say when my children were little, if I send them to school and they'll just send them home with a straight A report card and a grin from ear to ear, I'll be perfectly happy. Because deep down inside, I really know that if a student can read, they can learn anything they need to know on their own. In the very same way that Pike learned how to install stereo equipment. I guarantee you he didn't learn it from me. I barely know how to play the radio. Everything is written, and particularly now in this day of internet access, you can learn how to build a bomb, they say. Now, I don't know, I haven't made any efforts to build any bombs in my bathroom, but I've heard that before. And I know that just about everything else that I'm interested in, I can find out what to do on the internet. Most recently, I found out how to authenticate Audubon prints. Who'd have thunk it? But you can learn anything on the internet. But it's very important that children can read to attain that information, and that they have the sense of efficacy that says, hey, I'm smart, I can figure this out on my own. So I think it's very important for us to work over the long haul on students' self-esteem, or really that general area, their feelings of worth, whatever you want to call it, but certainly that term we use for the regard with which individuals hold themselves, because we know that when a student feels good about himself and about who he is, he will tend to be more successful in learning. And we also know that low self-esteem has some damning characteristics for youngsters, and one of those is that the single a common factor that we've been able to identify in youngsters who have substance abuse problems is the fact that they have low self-esteem. So it's very important. I think in school we tend to denigrate children sometimes and use sarcasm and use condescending remarks that really whittle away at their self-esteem just a little bit at a time. And what is left by the time a child gets out of school is a child who really doesn't feel very good about himself. And I think it's extremely important that we use success experiences in school and structure our classrooms in such a way that youngsters are developing as many positive feelings as possible about who they are and about how they feel about themselves and how empowered they feel about being able to master the expectations that they meet in school as well as in life. Certainly, some students with disabilities we know have reported that they have higher self-esteem when they're in classrooms with other youngsters who have disabilities. Certainly, this may mean that children with disabilities sometimes lack the socialization skills necessary to get positive attention and recognition in general ed classrooms, but also I think that oftentimes as teachers we don't structure our classrooms so that we're making certain that every child in there feels good about himself and has opportunities for success experiences. And this issue of self-esteem is so critical to success in later life and to the feeling of empowerment that says, oh, I can figure out how to do this, I can learn to do this, I can take care of myself, I can master these things. To enhance self-esteem, certainly we need to promote the feelings of worth and self-efficacy with students. And keep in mind what I said earlier, the fact that every time we structure an academic experience for a child and that child works really hard on it and he's unsuccessful, that there is a tremendous loss of self-esteem, and one that says, oops, I better protect myself next time by not taking any chance on looking foolish. I must not take a chance on trying and being identified as a person who can't do it if I try. I just think that is such an important point. Self-efficacy, I guess you know what that word means, but if not, self-efficacy has to do with a person's belief in his or her own ability to perform a specific task. Self-efficacy is a funny thing. You know, if you believe you can, and then if you do, you believe you can. So it's kind of a snowball effect. I'll tell you a little something interesting about that has to do with effective teaching. For years and years and years and years, we looked for all of the things that made effective teachers effective and ineffective teachers ineffective and so on and so forth. And I have to say that for many years we were really barking up the wrong tree. We were studying a lot of personality characteristics and different things that resulted in a really no net difference. Also, classroom management styles. The truth is, some teachers who are fairly permissive teachers have really pretty focused classrooms where everybody's on task and learning occurs, and then some who are very strict have kids who are feeling good about their learning and are successful and on task and so on and so forth. But in any event, after barking up the wrong tree for many years, in the last 20 or so years, researchers have really begun to identify critical differences in what make good teachers good, and we talked about some of those in here. We talked about the fact that teachers who keep students engaged and use more of their allotted time engaged in learning have higher achievement in their classrooms, that teachers who are better classroom managers do better, are with it, and they exhibit certain very observable constructs when they teach, like transitioning from one subject to a next. But in addition to that, there's another factor. Yes?
Is it possible to reverse that low self-esteem in the classroom if they're constantly being bombarded at home with negative comments and a negative attitude?
Well, I mean, I don't know the extent to which we can reverse a student's self-esteem about things. Certainly, parental approval and parental recognition is a very, very important thing. We know that. But it isn't something we can do anything about. You can offer parents suggestions about the fact that praise and reward and how important it is and how well you found the child responds to this and that. Even the parent you may need to talk to may not be the one that's there listening. So you may have a limited extent to influence what goes on in a child's home. But one thing you have total control over is what goes on in that student's classroom. And I don't know of anybody that has just wonderful self-esteem about anything. When you put me, I feel pretty good about myself really on a day-to-day basis. I think I'm not, all that bad. Life has told me I can do most of the things I want to, but you can put me in a room full of musicians and I feel like the biggest dope in the world. I mean, I am so bad at music, my own mother wouldn't let me sing in church. I just am bad at music. Any way you look at it, life has told me I am bad at music, and I believe it. And I can live without it. I'm good at art, so there. So the point of this is, I think if you're honest with yourself, you'd say you know, well, I really do feel insecure in this situation or that situation. With some people, it's social situations. I'm much more secure and I have a much greater sense of efficacy in intimate relationships. I can relate to anybody on a one-to-one, but turn me loose in a cocktail party and I'm absolutely miserable. I mean, I always say the same thing. If I say, the wrong thing. If I say, how's your husband? The person says, oh, well, I don't know, we're getting a divorce. You know, I'm just not good at that sort of thing. So I don't think any of us is good at everything. So I don't think that you can overcome, and I think it's important to be as good at as many things as you can. But I don't think that there's anything you can do bottom beyond make subtle suggestions about how parents might relate to their children. It isn't your job, for one thing. But what you can control is what goes on in your classroom. And if you think you can't make a big difference in a child's life in 9 months, you're wrong. You're wrong. You can be that teacher that makes a difference. And some of you will remember, as you look back on your career as a student, a teacher that made a tremendous difference in your life. You may also, unfortunately, remember one who had a damning consequence for you. I used to ask students that. I used to teach a graduate class, and I would ask students, it was on classroom management and affective behavior management skills, so I'd go around the room and I'd say, okay, everybody, tell me one horrible thing. Tell me the most horrible thing that happened to you when you were in school. And I mean, about the third time I did it, a girl stood up and told a story about being in the 3rd grade and showing her picture and what her teacher had to say to her when she showed her picture in school. And I was boo-hooing in front of a college class, thinking that someone had said that to a child. I mean, this girl still had such affect around this thing that this teacher had said to her when she was in the 3rd grade. That it broke my heart, and I thought, well, this is not acceptable. The teacher can't be crying in school, so I didn't do that anymore. But probably if I went around this very room right here and asked you the most horrible thing that you saw, what would happen is that you would relate something that would also have everybody in tears. But also, if you might be like Oprah, who could say, remember the 3rd grade teacher that turned your whole life around and made you an entirely different person. You know, Oprah drags that teacher out of mothballs every once in a while, parades her out on national TV, and I just love it because it provides such a convincing argument for what you can do as one teacher. I don't remember if I told you all this story or not, but I had the misfortune of going to my 40th year class reunion here not too long ago. I grew up in the only town in America where our town is so bad we have our reunion somewhere else. We had our class reunion in Dallas because our town is so bad. But anyway, they had all these old people my age there, and some 10 years older and some 10 years younger. It was a huge all-school reunion. And a boy that I grew up with came up to me and asked about my mother. And what he said to me was, I want you to know your mother was the best teacher I ever had in my whole life. She understood kids like me. And then he got this sort of faraway look in his eye, and then he said, unfortunately, the next year I had to move on, and I wasn't so lucky. But here he is, 60 years old, and still remembers what a difference my mother made in his life when he was 10. So you can be that teacher who makes that difference to a child in your classroom, even though you can't change their whole lives. And what research has shown us is that a teacher's sense of efficacy is one of the big determining factors in your effectiveness. In other words, and you can write this in ink, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're going to be right either way. And that is the sense of self-efficacy. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you will be right either way. The teacher who thinks he or she can ends up being the teacher who does. And the teacher who believes deep down in that they can't make a difference and they can't do it is going to be the teacher who is unsuccessful. So, all of this is to say that this notion about efficacy is important not only for students, it's important for them to feel that they can, because it will cause them to persist in their tasks. We'll talk more about the relation between not only motivation and affect, but also attention and memory, and how these characteristics all come together to determine whether or not kids are going to do what they're supposed to or not do what they're supposed to. But we'll follow up on that next week. But the child who thinks he can, believes he can, has so much greater commitment to the task because he thinks that everything over the long haul will pay off. And I suppose it's the same with teachers. You know, and I don't really know where teachers are concerned, whether it's the chicken and the egg thing or not. Certainly I think it is with kids. If they have a history of being successful, they believe that everything will pay off for them, and the reverse may be true. You know, if they have a history of not being successful, it's hard to believe that persistence task is going to pay off. Maybe it's the same with the teachers. Maybe the teachers who are really good believe they can, and so they do. All I know is that if you believe you can't be a good teacher and believe you can't manage the classroom, you probably need to go to Foley's and get a job, because you're not going to be very good at this. It's so very important to believe that you can and to persist until you do with these kids. And one of the ways is to make your kids successful, because when they're successful, they like you and they behave, and your job is so much easier. Interestingly enough, all the things about being a good teacher make your job so much pleasant and more rewarding, because the kids are really doing what they're supposed to do. Some of the additional techniques mentioned in your book are providing additional practice to reinforce prior knowledge. This goes back to Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development. Delivering instruction at a level where the students can achieve with assistance and support needs to be practiced until they are independently able to operate these task. Ongoing assessment needs to tell us what we need to drop back, reteach, what needs more practice. We can't be teachers who just assess and progress. We need to point out appropriate social models. We know that from Bandura and all of our empirical studies on social learning theory, that if students believe they can be successful, even if they have no experience with the task, if they see somebody else they can identify with who is successful at doing it. And this is a really important factor. We know advertisers, of course, are past masters at this, finding role models that kids can identify with, who, if they have these tennis shoes, they're successful, or if they behave in these ways or buy these things, they'll be popular or sought after or have girlfriends or whatever. We see this in advertising campaigns all the time. So it's important to point out appropriate social models, to provide positive peer support. And one thing that really we need to mention is counterproductive statements. When we focus on statements that say, oh, this is easy, you can do it. What we're really telling a child is, this is easy, you can do it. If you can't do this, you are really stupid. So what seems to be a motivating thing for us, oh, you can do it, it's easy, is a statement that needs to be replaced by, this is kind of hard, but I'm going to sit here with you, and I think if I help you with it, you'll be successful. Something of that nature will have a much more positive outcome than encouraging them to do things because it doesn't require much effort and it's easy. Then if they think that it's effortful and impossible, it will cause a greater loss to their self-esteem. Now, I think right now we're going to stop and take up with goal setting after the break.